What is up, New Beginnings Church family? I am still here hanging out with my friend Shane Willard. Got him in town and just having great conversations with him. And you know what's funny is anytime we're sitting at a coffee table or we're having dinner and we get these conversations going, it's amazing because we'll have some friends with us and they love just listening in on our conversations. And so that's what we thought it would be fun, just let you listen in on us. I was telling you about the life of our church, that lately we have been in what we just call legacy season. And this is where we start thinking about others. We think beyond ourselves. We think, what would God be able to do in us and through us as a church to bring about impact and life change? And so really, really cool projects, local missions, global missions, renovation projects, you name it, just making a difference in the world around us. And you were saying something so interesting. Of course, Jesus uses this famous line in the Sermon on the Mount that I want you to be the light of the world, like a city set on a hill that cannot be hidden. I want you to be like the salt of the earth. And when we think about salt and light and impact, tell me more about what you believe Jesus is meaning, or some of the cultural ideas behind what it means to be salt and light.
So let's start with salt, and then we'll move backwards to light, even though he says the other way. But salt, so in Jesus's world, salt was a staple element on every table. So there's these very natural things that goes on. One of the things is that salt easily dissolves in its environment. So one of the issues that Jesus is bringing up is you should be able to integrate yourself and assimilate yourself into whatever environment you're in. Like one place he said, when you go into a place, eat whatever they put in front of you. Well, what if it was bacon wrapped shrimp, right? So essentially Jesus called us to lay down certain numbers of our personal convictions for the sake of relationship and love. And that's just obvious stuff. But to me, one of the best metaphors with that is in Numbers, it says that every sacrifice done at the temple must be seasoned with salt. So what they did is obviously, with that being the command, I mean, think about all the activities going on at the temple. Think about so everything that they're doing, they have to throw salt on it. So what they had to do is they had to have a big stockpile of salt. And they took this very seriously. So if the salt ever got past its expiration date or lost its flavor, what they would do is with these big bags of salt, if you've been to Jerusalem, the temple's way up high, and the highest point, and Gehenna is the valley, it's the low point. So to walk salt all the way to the rubbish dump that's just a lot of work. So what they would do is they just cut open the bag and they throw it on the temple steps. And what they found was, just like we know today, is that salt is incredibly absorbent and acts as a great traction aid. And so Jesus said it this way: you're the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness or its flavor or goes past its expiration date, it's good for nothing except for to be thrown outside and trampled underfoot by men. And I've heard well-meaning people try to make a case that he's threatening people with hell or something there. And not there. He's actually using a common imagery that would have been in all their minds of the salt being thrown out on the temple steps and then trampled underfoot by men, essentially saying, you have a choice. You can allow your life to flavor the world around you for a long time, or your life can be a cautionary tale to keep other people from slipping. Your choice. So basically, I have the ability to go be impactful, or I can make such a mess of my life that I become the poster child of what not to do. Correct. I was I don't want, exactly. I don't want to do. Boy, that didn't work out for that guy. That guy married that girl for this reason, and now there's stuff that's cautionary.
I'm learning my lesson.
It's a cautionary tale where it was, and essentially Jesus is pointing out that, you can impact your world positively, or you can be the comedic butt of the joke. Essentially, you don't want your name to become a verb. Hey, don't pull a Shane Willard.
Don't shame that.
Don't. Hey, man, he totally, that's shaming right there. Right. And so you don't want that. And then of course, light is this reference back to creation, where in their world, what the Greeks called the logos, or the logic or the word. The Greeks had this idea that this world's so complex, there had to be a logic holding it all together. What the Jews called that light. And then later, because the Greek language had taken over, John says, in the beginning was the Logos, right? So John 1 is actually John's version of Genesis 1. In the beginning was the Logos. In Genesis, that same idea is, in the beginning, God created the earth and said, let there be light. So light was this literal and metaphorical entrance of the divine into chaos in order to bring new creation, fresh start, second chances, and the opportunity to write a better story. And the idea is that in creation, God never says, I'm too holy to engage that mess. It's the opposite. I'm too holy not to engage it, not to hurt it, criticize it, shame it, or condemn it, but to involve myself in the brokenness of the disorder in order to make a better narrative out of it. And ironically, according to the historian Alan Krieger, who wrote a great book called The Patient Ferment of the Early Church, where he got interested in how did the church grow in the first 300 years. Like after 323, obvious, Constantine got involved. But before that, it was illegal. It was, and this is obvious, but I didn't really think about it this way. Christianity in the first 323 years was not a public religion. It was a private society. That was the only way it could operate.
Wow.
And so the question he asked is how does a private society make such a big impact? And he says things that are just so obvious, but they were only obvious after he said it, is Christians did not change the world through their doctrine. They didn't have it. Jesus is Lord, the end. Or their scriptures. They didn't have it. Not until the late 300s. Christians made an impact on the world by engaging the disorder, not in a critical way, but by showing a better way, right? So there's two ways to engage something. You can point out the flaws, or you can just demonstrate a better way to live. And that's what happens in our world is anytime we cross the line into seeing Jesus as an argument to win, instead of a life of love to demonstrate. So as an example, so I get asked to do Q&As all the time. And this was recently this lady, poor lady, I've used her as an example a lot of weekends since this is, but she seemed like a nice person. She raised her hand, and now I've had large Q&As, like 2,500 people with a QR code behind my head saying, ask him anything. Look at that. So, but this was 120 people, and then someone was running and getting on mic, and she said, Shane, I'm being tormented for my faith in Jesus at my place of work. Do you have any advice? I'm being tormented for my faith in Jesus at a place of work. And like, this is in Australia. This is Saudi Arabia, right? So I said, well, I don't believe you. Like, I was just tired enough to be articulate. I said, oh, I don't believe you. And I did it kind of like that, like, don't believe me. And I just let the tension in the room rise, And I waited for her. She went, what? I said, oh, I didn't stutter. I don't believe you. I don't believe you're being tormented for your faith in Jesus at your place of work. I don't think you're lying either. A lie is an intent to deceive. I don't think you're doing that. I think you think you are, but there's no way you are. She said, what do you mean? I said, well, you mean you're the first one in and the last one to leave, and you have the least amount of laziness and the highest amount of work ethic and the highest amount of compassion and the highest amount of generosity, and you're the best peacemaker in your office. You turn the other cheek, you go the extra mile, you give your tunic and your cloak, and you regularly and steadily put other people's interest ahead of your own, and people don't like you. I don't believe you. Wow. And so what I was pointing out was, so we had a private chat afterwards, and she told me that I had helped her. Because what she had done, and I don't want to point the finger at her, this is all of us have a big plank in our eye, right? Like Jesus said, if you want to change your world, you got to see yourself as the bigger problem. Now we reverse that and go, we Christians are flawed, but you're really flawed. Well, how is that meant to? And what she had done is she crossed the line into seeing Jesus as an argument to win instead of a life of love to demonstrate. And she was weaponizing scripture in the general direction of people who had no emotional connection to it. Well, how's that going to work out?
Right.
And so whereas in the social media culture, you combat darkness by announcing your hatred of the darkness. How does that work? Followers complain about darkness. Leaders turn on the light. That's two different things. And for the first 300 years, Christians weren't allowed to complain about darkness. You imagine Christians complaining about Caesar. Like, are you serious? Paul took it so far in Titus 3, he says, a Christian should devote themselves to doing good in their community and avoid all controversies and quarrels about the law for their unprofitable uses. Like, so the Christian growth in the first 300 years had nothing to do with an announcement of what we didn't like about darkness. It had to do with engaging the darkness by demonstrating light. And Jesus is bringing this up. He's like, hey, don't hide your impact of demonstrating what a life of love would look like in this world. In creation, God engaged the disorder to bring order, new creation, fresh start, second chance, and opportunity to write a better story. How much more, if God could do that on a universal scale, what could we do in our world by harnessing the same spirit that raised Jesus from the dead and was present at creation and being light?
I love it. You were talking about in the early centuries of Christianity, of course, long before everybody had their own printed version of the Bible or wanted to debate things on social media. And it was Emperor Julian who, during one of the plagues, writes a letter to his pagan priest, and he's frustrated because people keep turning to Christianity. And his argument for why is because everybody keeps turning to Christianity because they take care of their own, they love the sick, they take care of the poor, and they take care of people better than the pagan priests do. And so it was in Julian's mind, he was mad that the Christians were gaining so much traction, but their traction came from their radical compassion and generosity.
Well, I didn't know that story. It's a brilliant story. Because Creator tells a similar story, not about Julian, but about us. I think he calls it what they believe is a smallpox pandemic in Carthage. And they went and consulted with the pagan oracle. And the pagan oracle was like, the end times are upon us. You better afflict yourself or God's mad, and was doing all this. And so Cyprian, the Christian bishop, preached a 4-point apology, which is where we get the word apologetics from. See, in our world, apologetics is arguing about what you believe. Original apologies was a defensive behavior. If the whole world converted to acting like this, the world would be better. And so his apology was, wouldn't the world be better if we took care of our sick and we cared for the poor and we fed the hungry? And instead of abandoning these people, we did this, and this. Wouldn't that be better? And so the truth, and Creator's book was written in 2016, which is before COVID. So it wasn't even subliminally a response to that.
Yeah.
But one of his top 5 reasons that the Christian church grew in the first 300 years was their response to pandemics.
Yeah.
And the demonstration of compassion, not an articulation of belief.
I love it. Well, our goal as a church is to be salt and light. And so if that gives you any type of encouragement, it's to say, hey, before we go into our environments and workplaces and try to drive a stake in the ground and be right, what if rather we engage those environments with light and love and compassion and generosity? Then we would earn the right to eventually be heard. Correct. Church, I love you so much. Hope you're encouraged. We'll see you soon.